You're on. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Good evening. I want to call this meeting of the Durham City Council to order at 7 o'clock on April the 20th of 2020, and certainly want to welcome everyone here tonight on this, again, very unusual, extraordinary meeting of the Durham City Council. We're meeting again virtually, as we did 2 weeks ago, and I want to appreciate our technical staff for making this possible, and all the other people who have helped to make it work so that we could have this meeting tonight. Before the moment of silence, I want to just remind all of us that in a single rehabilitation facility in Durham, we have 86 of the residents there who have been diagnosed with confirmed cases of COVID-19, and we have had deaths in our community and many people ill. We also have many people who are suffering economic deprivation, and so we want to think of all of them tonight as we enter into our moment of silence. So please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. And now I'm going to ask Councilmember Reese if he would recite the pledge for us.
I will do that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Good evening, colleagues and staff. Good evening, members of the public tuning in at home. I'm now going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Council Member. And now, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schul.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Caballero.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Present.
Councilmember Middleton.
Here.
Councilmember Reese.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now proceed to announcements by members of the council. I know that Councilmember Middleton has an announcement. I have an announcement. Is there anyone else that has an announcement? Would like to go first? Councilmember Freeman, I think you said yes?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I wanted to just take a moment and reflect, as you mentioned, on the COVID-19 and the responses that have been made, and really want to take a moment to thank many organizations across the city and the county that have stepped up to the challenge. I also want to specifically note that the COVID-19 food co-op has been moving food into the community at a rapid pace, and they've actually responded to the call to actually set up a fund to support our local small and mid-sized businesses and farmers. And so we're looking to see a thriving community fund moving forward. And we will be making a request for people to pledge funds to the Communities in Partnership in an effort to move that forward, to put some relief out there for the small businesses that might not qualify nor be aware of the funding that was available and is no longer available as far as stimulus and regarding unemployment and trying to keep their workers employed. So just making sure I give a heads up to everyone around that. And then also, I wanted to note that though the McDougal Terrace crisis may not be on the agenda, it has not been forgotten, and I look forward to getting updates from staff and DHA as we move forward. And wanted to make sure I gave a special shout out to the Durham Public Schools Foundation for stepping up and feeding the students and children across the county, and many faith-based organizations and institutions that have been stepping up with funding and resources around this, including institutions like Duke Energy and Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And I would also like to make sure that I acknowledge that the phase 1 funding is still available for the smaller community-based grants through Duke University. Duke Community partnered with, Duke Partners and Affairs And so just making sure that folks are aware that the funding is still available for small community-based grants up to $5,000 for immediate distribution. And phase 2 will be moving forward with larger funding available, I think up to $75,000 for nonprofit organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. And if you could make the link available to the Communities and Partners, Communities and Partnership Fund, that would be great.
I will.
Thank you.
And also, if I could just get in there, happy birthday shout out to my colleague, Councilmember Middleton. I had not had a chance to speak to him about that. So happy birthday, sir.
Many happy returns, youngster. All right, thank you. Any other announcements before we go to Councilmember Middleton? Councilmember Reese.
I just wanted to wish Councilmember Middleton a happy birthday, and I brought balloons. Sorry you can't have them. They're actually making a mess on the ceiling. I'll have to get rid of them in a bit, but happy birthday, my friend.
Very nice. Mayor Pro Tem, did you have an announcement?
No, I was just laughing at the balloons.
Okay. Great. Councilmember Middleton, I think you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much, colleagues. It's good to see all of your faces. I know this has been challenging times, and you know, with the flag behind you, Mr. Mayor, and Councilor Reese's balloons and flag, it's just showcasing my utter ineptitude when it comes. I got to settle for a wall. I don't know how to do any of that. So thank you so much for all of that, and it's good to see you. I want to echo, Mr. Mayor, your statements about what we're going through with respect to COVID-19, and send our best regards to our community that I think is doing an incredible job. I want to congratulate Durham County and the city of Durham for leading the state in slowing the spread and keeping down the spread of new infections in our state, of the large counties in our state. So I just want to send a shout out to all our folk. I know that even as we deal with this, while our crime is down, we've still got some shooting going on in our city. So I just want to send heartfelt regards to those that are dealing with those issues in our city, and know that we've got to do a lot of things at the same time as leaders in the city. So I just want to send my heartfelt regards out, particularly to the McDougal terrorist community that had an incident that was reported heavily on the news the other day. So we got work to do. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to briefly thank my colleagues for their indulgence. As I've indicated to the council via email, I'll seek recognition later on in the meeting at the gavel's discretion to introduce a motion to rescind our previous action regarding the Ward 3 seat. I'll briefly share why I'm doing it and seek the council's agreeance to that, up or down. So I just wanted to put that out there during the time of announcement, Mr. Mayor. And of course, at your discretion, if you would yield to me, I'd like to put that before my colleagues for consideration.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Middleton. We will do that. Colleagues, my plan is to go through the consent agenda, which is pretty much all that we have, and then have that discussion, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, I have a couple of announcements. One is I want to thank the clerk for arranging for public comment. We had 8 comments. We had 4 comments that were concerned about loud motorbikes, very large groups of people on very loud motorbikes in North Durham. You all may be like me. We've received a number of emails about this in the past couple of weeks, and I just want to mention that to you, Mr. Manager. I know the police are aware of that, but if you could just pass on these comments to them, that would be great. The second group of comments were about the people in Durham who are unable to pay their rent, and can we do anything about that? And we'll have our budget discussion coming up on next week, and we'll be taking up that kind of thing at that time. So I know you all had the chance to read the comments, but I wanted to mention them to you. And then the only other thing I would say about public comment, and I want to thank the clerk, is we had the comments were limited to 250 characters. And the clerk and I talked, and we received a couple of emails from people complaining about that, and I think we all agree that that's problematic. So we are now, I want to thank the clerk, Diana Schreiber, and Tonetta Amos in the clerk's office. We're now going to be receiving up to 4,000 characters. I estimated that's about 500 words we might receive from a person. If anyone, of course, has even more than that to say to us, they can do so through an email. But this will allow us to receive longer comments if people would like to make them. I do want to report the good news that we are down now to 3 families from McDougall Terrace who are still in hotels. So we are finally really turning the corner, and this has been on all of our minds for a long time, and I'm really grateful that this work is ongoing and people are finally getting home in large numbers. I do want to say just a little bit about the coronavirus, just to kind of report very briefly to my colleagues who I know much of this, but also to our community a little bit. I mentioned before, we have more than 80 cases in a single facility, and this is very worrisome. It's a rehab facility, and of course, people in rehab facilities are very vulnerable. They're usually there because they might be recuperating from surgery, for example. And so this is of deep concern. Our public health folks are there, the county public health folks, and working there, but it's a very deep concern. We have now, according to our local count, more than 400 cases. These are climbing daily, but we're not seeing in Durham what we are in New York and Detroit and New Jersey and elsewhere, which is great. We're now, I believe, 38 days out from our first case, and I'm happy to say that our actions are working. People in Durham are doing what Durham needs to do to keep us safe. The Duke Health System's modeling shows that we are flattening the curve, and as Councilmember Middleton said, the growth in our cases is declining, which is great. 3 weeks ago, we were growing at, I guess the first week at 12% per day, down to 8%, down to 7%, and I just did the average of the last 7 days, and our cases are growing at about 4.5% per day. We have had a couple of days where we had a lot of cases. For example, when we found out, added to the list, like the day we found out about all the cases at the rehab facility. So we're not out of the woods by any means, but we're doing a good job. Our trend is better, quite a bit better than North Carolina as a whole, better than Washington State, better than South Korea, which of course was the nation that did the best. But we have a long way to go. Social distancing, washing hands, staying at home are all working. We're adding the requirement now for face coverings. And just a few things I want to say about the face coverings. The order requires that people cover their face when they are in a place where it's not easy for them to socially distance. So grocery stores, I went up to the bank today, and even though I was only using the teller machine, I knew there might be other people there, and I wore my mask over my face and eyes. I'm sorry, but my nose and mouth. I didn't put them over my eyes. I could have, but I didn't. So the thing I want to say about this, we're getting a lot of questions, and I understand why, about our masks being made available, and it's hard to mask up if people aren't making masks available. Here's the thing I want to say, and I want to appreciate my colleagues. Many of you all have posted with yourself in a mask that is covering your nose and mouth. And what we're asking people to do is just use something very simple and homemade. I've been using a bandana. Many people are using bandanas, large handkerchiefs. T-shirts will work. Anything that will cover your nose and mouth is what we're asking people to do. There are people in Durham, led a couple of doctors, Dr. Larry Greenblatt and Dr. Eric Westman, are doing an amazing job of getting thousands of masks out to people on our transit system, in our nursing homes, and many other places in Durham, and lots of other people, volunteers are. I've gotten several emails just today, people offering masks, and have been connecting them to Doctors Greenblatt and Westman. So many people are making masks. Many companies are making masks. People are sewing all kinds of wonderful masks, and we're getting them out as broadly as we can. But we don't need to do that. We all have something at home that we can use, and so I want to urge people to do that. You don't need to use a mask when you're out doing individual exercise, but when you're going to be in a place where you are going to be with others, please mask up. We're not going to keep anyone off of transit or deny anybody access to transit because of this. We do require it, but no one will be denied access to our bus system, and that's very important. Right now, it looks like from what Duke is modeling that we should peak around April 29th. I just saw the most recent modeling. And the peak is, I think there's a lot of confusion about what a peak means in this case. It's the moment when you're experiencing that when your active cases are at their height. And after that, more people are coming out of being in active cases that are going in. And so your hospitalizations will peak a week or two after your cases peak. But we're expecting the cases to peak in late April, probably maybe very early May. And we're then expecting them, according to the Duke model, to fall, and as they say, if we keep social distancing measures in place. And even then, we're predicting a total of about 1,200 cases by September. A total, not all at once, but that will be our total. If we can hold our total to that, that would be a great achievement. So now we're beginning to think as a state and with the guidance of the state health department about how to safely begin to reopen businesses and other activities. We're a long way from being able to open big crowds, but you all know that in our stay-at-home order amendment this week, we made some adjustments to allow some more real estate activities, as well as to allow the farmers markets to operate in a safe way that they worked with a cooperative extension to make possible, and I appreciate that so much. So baby steps in that direction are what we're going to take, and as the governor said so well, we need tracing, testing, and trends. Testing and tracing of cases, and then we need to be able to watch our trends, and when we see a spike, we need to be able to take action to stop that. It's important to remember, I think, what happened in the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, which was an incredibly deadly epidemic. It had three peaks. It had one peak, and then all the various restrictions were loosened. Then it had a much higher peak that no one expected, and that's where most of the people died. Thousands and thousands of Americans died. And then it actually had a third peak after restrictions were loosened again. We're in much better shape than that now, is because we have tests that if we can get them on the ground, we can figure out how to isolate and quarantine. There are lots of things that we can do now that we couldn't in 1918, but it is important to remember that this is going to be gradual. And I appreciate the governor's metaphor. He says this is not going to be a switch that's turned on and off. It's going to be more like a dimmer. We're going to gradually come back. And we will be thinking about that locally very actively now. So I just wanted to try to summarize where I think we are for the community. And I'm very proud of Durham. We've done a great job of socially distancing, of doing staying at home and doing all the things that we've needed to do. And I really understand people's angst and pain about the economic situation we're in. We have to try to figure out ways that people can come back gradually, and we're going to do that. So I'm sorry that's an overly long announcement, a lot longer than I usually give, but I did just want to offer those remarks, colleagues, and thank you for your enduring them. Now we're going to turn to our priority items. And our first priority item from the city manager. Mr. Manager, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here with you virtually. The City Manager's Office has one priority item this evening, which is agenda item number 16, proposed acceptance of offer to donate property located at 2702 and 2704 Dearborn Drive. Just wanted to point out that additional information has been added to that agenda item at the request of the City Council, and that's all my priority items for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Madam Attorney.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members of council. It's good to see you all this evening. There are no priority items from the City Attorney's Office tonight.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Madam Clerk.
Good evening, everybody. I do have a priority item. I wanted to remind you that the ballots for boards, committees, and commissions has been sent to you, or the multiple ballots, and I would like to have them returned to me by Wednesday noon. So that's April 22nd, so they can be tallied. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, and thank you for providing those to us early. I think we've got a good system going for that. Let me just mention that the clerk and I also discussed trying to get our boards and commissions back to meeting in a way that we can make work virtually. And she's going to have that as a priority item at the work session this Thursday. So we will be able to begin a little bit of a discussion about that and try to get that moving along. All right, those are the priority items, and now the consent agenda. The consent agenda can be approved by a single vote of the council. Any council member, or usually a member of the public, but in this case, council member, can pull an item from the agenda, and it will then be heard at the end of the meeting. These consent agenda items are items that the council has previously worked on. Item 1, approval of city council minutes. Item 2, boards, committees, and commissions 2019 attendance reports. Item 3, citywide strategic plan performance audit February 2020. Item 5, community development block grant CDBG contract with Urban Ministries of Durham, Inc. Item 6, second contract amendment with the Housing Authority of the City of Durham, community development block grant CDBG subrecipient contract for the rehabilitation of the Laurel Oaks townhomes. Item 7, Housing Authority of the City of Durham grant funding request, McDougal Terrace. Item 8, Emergency Response Plan and Source Water Risk and Resilience Plan.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull that item.
Item 8, okay. Item 9, Resolution of Support for Reclassifying a Segment of the Eno River for Water Supply. Item 10, 2020 Manhole Rehabilitation South, Award of Construction Contract to Bionomic Services, Inc. Item 11, 2020 Manhole Rehabilitation North, Award of Construction Contract to AM Liner East, Inc. Item 12, Durham Sports Commission Interlocal Agreements. Item 13, Bid Report, February 2020. Item 14, Lease to the Museum of Durham History at 521 West Morgan Street, Durham, NC, parcel number 103112. Item 15, Amendment to the Construction Manager RIS CMAR contract for construction services with Skanska USA Building, Inc. for the Hoover Road Park Project. Item 16, Proposed Acceptance of Offer to Donate Property located at 2702 and 2704 Dearborn Drive. Item 17, 2019 Fourth Quarter Crime Report. Item 18, Buckingham Road Culvert Replacement SD 2020-03. Item 19, Alpine Road Culvert Replacement SD 2020-04. Item 20, Street and Infrastructure Acceptances. Item 21, Utility Extension Agreement with VC Owner LLC to serve Venable Center Office. Item 22, Virtual Chief Information Security Officer, VCISO Managed Services. Item 23, Ashton Place Development Loan Commitment. And those are the consent agenda items. And with the exception of item 8, I'll accept a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Reese?
Mayor, on item number 17, we are going to receive the report from Chief Davis, right?
No, we weren't planning to receive that.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay.
That's okay. But what the manager said is if we do have questions, so please email Chief Davis if you have any questions or concerns about the report. Thank you. All right. So with the exception of item 8, we're going to vote on the consent agenda. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I think we'll go ahead and do item 8 now, and then we'll go to the Councilmember Middleton's, the item that he had raised. So, Councilmember Freeman, let's talk about item 8.
Thank you. I just really wanted to highlight that I appreciate the staff and their quick response and handling all of our emergency needs. I just want to make sure that I highlight that it's important to make sure that we don't lose sight of businesses that aren't always on our radar and these conversations. And just noting that I mentioned at work session, it becomes more of an issue in the long term, but in this short run, I'm okay with this proposal, but it does feel a little off-putting in that you're selecting a company based on level of comfort, and that was just an issue that I had. I just wanted to make sure I raised it again and make sure that we're paying attention to other organizations as well that might not often fall into the category that we've used them in the past.
All right. Thank you very much. Do you want a response from staff, Councilmember, or did you just want to make those comments?
If staff can just let me know that they're keeping that in mind, that would be helpful.
All right.
Doesn't always come across.
Okay. Mr. Manager, or I see Don Greeley here. Mr. Greeley, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Yes, we'll definitely keep that in mind, and as we go forward, the emergency response and water source risk and resiliency plan is required by EPA to be completed by this fall, and AECOM did a great job with the risk and resiliency plan, and this emergency response plan is an extension of that. But we always keep that in mind. We work through with our equity department to make sure that we do our local businesses before we go out and solicit any consultants.
Thank you, Mr. Greeley.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Okay, I'll now accept a motion for approval of item 8.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and second that we approve item 8. I'll do it by voice this time. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We do not have any comments regarding McDougall Terrace, which is also on our agenda. Let me say, council members, we'd agreed to keep this on until the McDougall Terrace residents are home. If we find out that they are home by our next meeting, we won't have this item, but if they are not home, we will. So just wanted to say that. Now, Councilmember Middleton, I'm going to turn the floor over to you for some comments, and then we'll have some discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for your indulgence this evening on this matter. I know the agenda was pretty straightforward, so I'll try not to drag it out. I want to firstly start by saying that when the duly elected representatives of the people speak, it is a fearful and awesome thing, and it's to be taken seriously.
Mark Anthony, we can't hear you. Can you hear me? Let's see. Is this just a problem that Mark Anthony's having? Another colleague, can you unmute and say something?
I hear you okay, Mr. Mayor. And
I can hear you, and I don't think I can
hear
have any
Mark
problems.
Anthony.
Okay. Okay, let's see here. I'm not sure. Mark Anthony, do you think it's a connection problem, or do you think it's your computer? Do you know?
I think he's on his iPad.
Oh, he's on his, okay.
I did send him a message to say he might want to just call in.
Yeah, you could stay on your screen and then give us a call also. We haven't gotten the technology perfect yet, have we? So I see Daniel Terry is on. Daniel, have you been able to advise Councilmember Middleton about how to reach us? Mr. Manager, is there anyone who do you think can offer us a little bit of technical help to Councilmember Middleton so we can try to make this work?
Mayor, we've got several people trying to get in touch with him. His cell phone is not picking up, and he's not responding to text. So I think it's his internet connection at his home. It's not a issue if everybody else is working.
Okay, let's see.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You know what? I'm not even going to make this. This is crazy. I think it's the computer. I'm going to.
We can see you and hear you.
You hear me? Okay. Does it sound scratchy?
A little bit, but that's okay. We can hear you well.
Okay. Okay. I've just left the meeting. What I was saying, Mr. Mayor, is that I have great deference when a duly elected body of the people speaks. And I think it's something to be taken very seriously. So I rise tonight. I'm just going to say rise tonight, but I present tonight with great humility and deference to my colleagues when I ask for a motion to rescind an action that we've taken, and that is regarding the filling of the Ward 3 seat. And I think for the sake of my colleagues, I owe them an explanation. I think I owe the people of Durham an explanation as to why I'm doing this. So very briefly, what has changed since our last meeting? When we voted to move forward after a wonderful piece of work by Councilor Reese to lay out a process for us. I believe what has changed, Mr. Mayor, is that we've become, I certainly have, and I think we've become a little more knowledgeable on some of our options as a council that are before us. And I think those options allow us to do something that I know is incredibly important to all of us, and that is maintain our strict guardianship and protection of our love of equity in the city. I think we have an opportunity to move forward and protect and uphold our most cherished value, or one of our most cherished values here in Durham. And I know that we prefer to do that more rather than less. I want to thank so many voices that have been raised in our community. First, I have to thank the leadership and membership of the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People, who were incredibly diligent and incredibly insistent on lifting the concerns and issues of some of our most vulnerable and affected folks and residents. We're all being affected by this COVID-19 pandemic, but I want to particularly thank Durham Committee for raising their voice first to put us on notice that there may be some things that we need to consider moving forward. I then also, of course, want to thank the People's Alliance and Friends of Durham who added their voices to the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People. When you have all three political action committees in our city agreeing on something at one time, that is a major thing. That's a universal shake. So I want to thank all of them for raising their voices. But I do also understand the importance of keeping fidelity with the letter of the law and the spirit of the law as well, and I'll speak briefly to that. Colleagues, during the civil rights movement, one of the things that our forebears in the civil rights movement fought against, of course, was access, particularly when it came to the vote, which is the most sacred way we participate in government, particularly self-governance. And something that was pretty common throughout the South were poll taxes and literacy tests when folk came to vote. And these were super constitutional barriers that were arbitrarily foisted upon people by racists, by those in power who wanted to impede Black people's ability to vote. So they came up with these extra tests and these extra barriers to overcome in order to just exercise their right to vote, in order to be involved in the process. I know that no one in this government, no one in this council supports literacy tests or poll tax. But I think that we have to be mindful in this current environment that we're very careful not to, in a de facto accidental way, create extra barriers to access for our people. People that, as we've spoken to during our announcements, are dealing with unemployment, dealing with fear, dealing with, if I can't buy a mask, what do I use to make one out of? Dealing with when can I leave my house, and do I need a mask to ride the bus? There are so many things that our people are dealing with. I know that we as a government don't want to create a situation where it feels like there are extra barriers for them to be involved in the process. So as I alluded to earlier, I believe that, and I sent a proposal out to each of you, and by request, the media has gotten it as well, regarding what I believe is a way forward in which we can honor the law and our responsibility, our sacred responsibility, but also live up to our values. So the substance of the motion I'll be presenting, colleagues, is to rescind our previous action to fill the seat under our charter, and to instead proceed under North Carolina General Statute 160A-3, which will obligate us to fill a seat through selection, but allow us to do it in a reasonable time. I think that reasonable time can be determined by us, but at the very least, I think the stay-at-home order being lifted should be at least one marker, not solely the only marker, but at least one marker that we look to let us know that we might be approaching some degree of normalcy. I just don't think that I could explain wholeheartedly or with full conviction to anyone doing the selection process under our current circumstances. And I think North Carolina General Statute 160A-3 gives us that path forward to make the selection process in a reasonable time. I do also want to speak to the marvelous piece of legal work that our city attorney Kim Rayberg, has done for us in clarifying some of our options and some of our responsibilities. And I do want to also say, because I think it's important as an elected that folk understand where I'm coming from and how I'm operating. Earlier today, the Indy had an article come out that detailed what was going on with the filling of the Ward 3 seat, and quoted from our city attorney's memo that we got, the brilliant memo that we got from the city attorney, and also quoted me in the article. And I want to be very clear to the people of Durham on two things. One, we know that we have an obligation as a council to act in accordance to the spirit and the letter of the law. At no time, at any time, did I suggest that we just ignore filling the seat and opting for an election. What I did ask, however, is there a way that, as part of our selection process, which is not enumerated by the charter, it doesn't prescribe what that selection process should look like. I asked, and I still have this query in me, is there a way to make part of our selection process an assessment of the feasibility of proceeding with the process? In other words, if our applicant pool is being affected by let's say, a worldwide deadly pandemic, will that in any way hamper a good faith effort to fill a seat? And if we, in a good faith effort, reach that conclusion, then to opt for an election. And not only did I did not suggest that we foist that upon ourselves or take that responsibility upon ourselves unilaterally. My proposal called for us to actually ask the General Assembly to either get clarification from the General Assembly if we could do that, or if not, then by relief through a local bill, exempt us from having to do that so we could go to an election. So I wanted to be clear about that. And I certainly am well aware that the City Council does not in and of itself have the authority to amend our charter. I never made any representation privately or publicly that we could amend our charter ourselves. I did, however, once again suggest that we appeal to the General Assembly to provide us with some relief. Turns out that the first thing I asked for in my proposal, which was essentially moving the 60-day clock, the start time of the 60-day clock up, is already available to us practically and in a realistic way through North Carolina General Statute 160A-3, which allows us to fill a seat in a reasonable way. I have participated in a selection process before, so I'm clearly not anti-selection process. I participated in the process, and at no point did I raise any concern or objections to us engaging in the selection process. And of course, at that time, there wasn't a worldwide deadly pandemic going on. I think COVID-19 changes things. I think what we're dealing with changes things. I think that access is one of our most sacred values and cherished values. And we now have an opportunity based upon some incredible legal work and based upon some incredible research by our city attorney and by some voices in the community that pressed us, the Durham Community Affairs of Black People and People Alliance, Friends of Durham, and others that have pressed us to look for other ways to continue to fight for who we are. And that's what we do in Durham. We fight and we look for ways, the Durham workaround, I think is what we call it, to lift up our values and make sure that they shine forth. So with that said, Mr. Mayor and colleagues, I'm going to yield at this time. I believe the chair of our Rules Committee, Councilor Reese, might have something to say, but of course the gavel will decide who goes next. But I think I'll yield at this time. And after the discussion, my intention is either by traditional vote motion, Mr. Mayor, or if you sense that the debate is trending in an acceptable way, perhaps by unanimous consent, to rescind our prior action to suspend the selection process as it's going forward now to fill Ward 3 and opt to proceed now under North Carolina General Statute 160A-3, which will allow us to fill this seat in a reasonable amount of time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Councilmember Middleton. And I appreciate that. I'm glad we were able to hear you. Even though the technology is not perfect, I'm glad we had a backup there. Thank you. And I am going to call on Councilmember Reese, the chair of our Council Procedures Committee, for any comments that he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Middleton. Really appreciate the substance of the comments that you've made and your desire to try to find a solution that matches who we want to be as a community with our obligations and our fidelity both to our city charter and state law. Wanted to clarify a couple of things. First of all, I think the motion to rescind is not properly made to rescind the idea that we had to go forward with a selection process, because that's not the motion that passed 2 weeks ago. The motion that passed 2 weeks ago was to set a timeline to fulfill the process that's laid out in our procedures manual. And if the motion to rescind is a motion to suspend the remaining portions of that timeline in favor of another process, that's perfectly fine to me. But I don't want to give anybody the impression that we are somehow rescinding the decision we made to fill the seat by appointment. We're not, because we are going to fill the seat by appointment under the state statute. The second clarification I wanted to make is that 160A-3 is a state law that it basically says where there is a state law process to do a thing, and there is a city charter provision to do a thing, a city council can elect between the two and still be in compliance with both state law and their charter. Fortunately for us, there is a state law provision governing the filling of vacancies on municipal elected boards. It applies in almost every city and town in North Carolina, except for those that have a specific charter provision, which Durham does. It was passed in 1979 for reasons that passeth understanding, creating this obligation to fill the vacancy within 60 days or trigger a special election. The General Statute 160A-63 is the statute that outlines a separate process, and the law 168-3 is the law that gives us the ability to choose between them. And the difference between our charter process and 168-63 is that there is no 60-day clock put on a local elected board to appoint a replacement to fill the vacancy. And so it provides us with the flexibility that, say, for example, that the town of Chapel Hill has under its actual charter. And as many of you know, Chapel Hill currently has a vacancy on their town council. and have elected to defer consideration of the appointment process until some later date because their charter does not have a 60-day clock on it. Of course, ours does, but the state statute does not. And so I think proceeding under the state statute is the most reasonable course for us now. I want to thank our amazing city attorney, Kim Rayberg, for helping all of us understand our obligations both under the charter to proceed with an appointment and also the possibility of electing to proceed under state law. And it still creates the obligation for an appointment. The word shall is in both. But the state statute, as I said, does not have the 60-day window within which we must act. And obviously, that is something that we would all like to avoid if we can. We'll just say that as the chair of the Procedures Committee and as someone who was tasked with the responsibility of coming up with a timeline to do this, had I known that 168-63 could apply to a city with a charter with a different provision, that would have been my proposal 2 weeks ago. Because I think it makes all the sense in the world for us to wait until we get back to some kind of regular order to move forward. What that looks like on the other end is something we're going to have to spend some time thinking about and talking about. I take with great appreciation Councilmember Middleton's suggestion that at the very least the stay-at-home orders be lifted. But I say, again, with respect, I don't know that the orders are going to be lifted anytime soon. I think what we are more likely to see, at least what I've heard from public health experts, is that we're likely to see a gradual releasing of restrictions in successive amendments to our stay-at-home orders. And then in the unfortunate case where we get additional infections that begin to mount again, some additional restrictions put back on. So I think all of that goes to say that I don't know exactly what we're going to be looking for in terms of a trigger for ourselves to figure out when it's time to start the process, the appointment process. But I do think that amongst the 6 of us, working with our public health experts, our great staff, and the people in the community in Durham, we can figure it out. I truly believe that. And the other thing I wanted to say before we kind of get moving a little bit more is to say that I really appreciate the ability to reach out to Councilmember Middleton and talk through these issues this afternoon. As I told him, and as I mentioned to the city attorney earlier today, I spent some time late last week and over the weekend talking to individual council members about the possibility of using the state statute 168-63 as an alternative to the city charter. I think the risk in doing it that way, as I've said before, is we can't say today what conditions in our community are going to need to look like for us to be ready to go forward with the appointment process. But as I said before, I'm confident that the 6 of us with our great staff and the people of this city, we can figure it out together. And I'm committed to doing that. I do have one suggestion about kind of what happens, the first step in figuring that out, at least in terms of putting a flag in the ground. And that is when all is said and done with whatever procedural process we need to do next, I'll ask that we put this matter back on a work session agenda on August 20th. And it would be my expectation that I would work with the mayor and Councilmember Middleton and all of my colleagues, as well as our staff and members of the public, to have a better sense between today and that time about how we can plan to move forward. And obviously that won't be the next time we talk about this. I'll be in constant communication with y'all as we go through the next several months. And hopefully as we see a gradual releasing of restrictions in Durham and that give us the ability to move forward. But I didn't want to leave it completely open-ended. I do think that having a date for all of us to have on our calendars to come back and talk about it at the very least makes sense. Hopefully by then we are meeting in person, maybe with some additional, I don't know what that would look like, but maybe we'll be meeting in person again in some form or fashion, and we'll have an easier time with it. Those are the remarks I wanted to make about it. Just, I guess, ask the city attorney what we kind of need to do from a procedural process to elect to use 168-63, and how we move forward on that basis. So Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your patience as I talk for a long time.
Thank you, Councilmember. Madam Attorney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Reese. So I would say to proceed under 168-63 rather than under the charter provision, there's going to need to be a second to Councilmember Middleton's motion to rescind the prior process. You all need to have an up and down vote and reverse that decision. And then a motion to proceed under 168-63 to proceed. And I think that, as you know, Councilmember Reese, the council does have some prescriptives in its council procedures manual that govern filling vacancies. Those are not necessarily tied to use of the charter, so those can be instructive and some sort of a framework for you in terms of a process. But beyond that, I think that where you start is dealing with the motion to rescind and then voting on a motion to proceed under the other statutory provision.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Are there any questions for the attorney at this point? Councilmember Caballero?
Not so much a question for our city attorney, but just clarification. So essentially we go either one of two ways. Either we follow what's in our in our city charter, which is the 60-day clock. And then if we fail to do so, we trigger a special election, or we use the state statute, which doesn't have the clock, but then if we fail to fill the appointment, there is no special election. It would just fall under the natural occurring election, which is November 2021. And I just want to say that so that it's made very clear what responsibility we have as a council.
That is my interpretation of that statute, Councilmember Caballero. Yes.
Thank you.
If you fail to find consensus in the appointment process under the general statute 168-63, that it would just carry over to the next municipal election, which, as you said, is 2021.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Mr. Mayor, if it's appropriate,
Freeman?
I would just like to make the second to Councilmember Middleton's motion to rescind. And I'm assuming he's taking, it was to rescind the action from the April 6th meeting.
I don't believe we have a motion yet, but when we do have a motion, you will definitely be able to second it.
Thank you.
Other questions for our attorney or other comments at this time? Councilmember Middleton?
Thank you. Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. I appreciate Councilor Reese's comments and, again, his diligence on this. And, again, I can't say enough about the work that our city attorney has done. I do want to clarify, I was not in my original iteration suggesting that we weren't going to select. And by virtue of my moving to proceed under 168-3, perhaps I was inartful, but my assumption was that implies that it's going to be a selection not implies, it's going to be a selection process under the the statute. So forgive me. I do want to, for the sake of the integrity of the record, and just keeping fidelity with my original concerns, that the notion of an election, the proposal I made, if we thought as a council that was something that we thought was worth pursuing, the proposal that I offered would allow us to ask the General Assembly for that leeway to proceed. Again, I appreciate the incredible counsel that we've gotten from Professor Bluestein and our own esteemed city attorney, but I still, and with deference to also the many voices in the community that have been raised, if this is something we thought was worth pursuing, we could make inquiries in this. And I want to very much be clear that the proposition that part of our selection process could very well be, much like a state, we vote motions of statements of consistency, could very well be a statement of feasibility. Is it feasible at this time to do the selection process? And if we find not, then then proceed to the election. I happen to think, and if we are challenged, we've taken the city to war over many things. I think that's a fight worth having. And if someone is going to challenge the outcome of an election because we decided in the midst of a worldwide killer pandemic that this probably isn't a good time to do a selection process, if someone were going to challenge that, I would, that's a fight as one of the leaders of the city that I think would be worth having, that I'd be willing to have. So I just want to make it clear to those that are listening to this debate that I am not recommending the selection process under the general statute because I think that an election is untenable or that we don't have a path to work towards it. I'm doing it because I take seriously our role and to fill the election. I take seriously the prior action of my colleagues. As I said, it is a fearful and awesome thing when the voice of the people are expressed through their elected leaders. And I take very seriously the prior action. So, which is why I'm proposing the general statute selection process. However, I want the record to be reflected on the record. I think that if we decided we want to go with an election, that is available to us. I mean, there are ways that we can make that happen and proceed as a body to make that happen. Although that's not what I'm pushing now. I stick by my intent to rescind the prior action to move on with the selection process under the statute. But I do want the record to reflect that if we chose to pursue an election, we could do that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Council Member. Other comments at this time? Okay, I have a couple of comments. Let me just, one of my concerns I want to express is I think it's important that we not say lifting the stay-at-home order is a sine qua non for proceeding. I think what Councilmember Reese said is quite possible. I think both from the state level and the city level, these orders are going to be with us for a while, and hopefully what we'll see is a gradual loosening. But I think we could definitely be in a situation where we've all felt very comfortable having a selection prior to the the final rescinding of a stay-at-home order. So I do want to put that out. The other thing my other thought is that August 20 seems late to me for a discussion. I'm not sure what I don't know. Are we going to have a council vacation? I think maybe the city manager already took that away from us. But what is our first July, or what is our last July? Do we have a July work session? Anybody have that on their calendar?
I think it's near July 25th.
Yeah. I guess I would be more comfortable having an initial discussion at that point. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to do it at that point. We don't know. But I'd rather be able to discuss it then and see if we are in a position that we think we can do that. I don't think that's not part of a motion as I understand it. But just to respond to Councilmember Reese's proposal, I would prefer if we started talking earlier. And if we can't do it earlier, then we can do it later. Councilmember Reese, do you have any concerns about that?
I just don't know. This is the first I'm hearing that we've got meetings in July. So that would be.
Yeah, you're right. That's a great point. I guess I
make one once in a while, Mr. Mayor.
Are we going on vacation in July? I don't know. Okay. What I'll say is that I have concerns that August meeting is late, and that if there are ways that we can figure out to do it ahead of that, we may need a special meeting. But I'd like to start having the discussion earlier.
How do you feel about August 6th?
Better.
Great. Sounds good. Let's go with that.
Okay.
Mark, if Councilmember Middleton likes it, I think yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And I know that's not something we have to set in stone. I just wanted to let you all know on both those points what I've been thinking about. let me just also say, it seems like we may have a consensus on this, a consensus that I'm happy to join, but only because I want to join the consensus of the council and support what you, Councilmember Reese and Councilmember Middleton want to do. And Councilmember Freeman clearly as well. I don't actually think this is the best way to proceed. I think that normalizing as much as we can, and going ahead and making this appointment under the charter provisions, if it take us instead of 30 days, a 60-day schedule would be fine. But I also know that that's just a difference of opinion, and I'm happy to join the majority in voting for this procedure. My comfort level with it is much higher than if we were to go to an election, spend a couple $100,000 on a primary that very few people voted in, and especially under the charter provision, or under the and I do deeply believe. I've heard some interpretations of the charter that it doesn't really require, that it doesn't really require us to try to make the appointment. I believe the charter does require us to try to make the appointment. But I'm also happy to proceed under the state legislation. And my understanding of that is exactly as, from what City Attorney Rayberg said, is exactly as Councilmember Reese and Councilmember Middleton expressed it. And I do believe that we don't want to be waiting under that provision for an election in 2021. I think that would be really, really bad. So with that said, it's not my preference, but I don't always have to have my preference. Okay. Other comments? Councilmember Middleton.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much. I appreciate your leadership and the spirit of cooperation and congeniality that you always bring to your seat. I want to firstly say I was in no way suggesting that the stay-at-home order was the plus ultra for us to move forward with the selection process. It was just an example. I was giving it at least one possible indicator that we might be heading towards normalcy. I also
God willing, we will be there.
Absolutely. I also want to associate myself with your comments that the charter. I embrace the reading that the charter doesn't just let us ignore the selection process. As a matter of fact, that was the very animating spirit of my proposal, that if in fact it does it and we need permission, then let's get permission from our final arbiter. So what I was proposing was in deference to that we can't assume this mantle for ourselves. I never suggested that we could, and that if we needed to enlist the legislature to give us a pass, suffice it to say, when this thing is all over, as a member of the legislative committee, I do plan on making a recommendation that we get our charter changed at the legislative level to mirror more what Chapel Hill has, and that's just to make a selection in a reasonable time. So that's something colleagues just forecasting. But when we get past this madness. So with that said, Mr. Mayor, at your direction, I'm prepared to make a motion at your, of course. At your
go ahead, Council Member.
Well, Mr. Mayor, in light of your comments about seeming unanimity, I'm going to, rather than make a motion, I'm going to move, if there's without objection, unanimous consent on rescinding our prior action to fill the council seat under the city charter.
I'm going to ask the city attorney what's appropriate in this situation.
Sorry, Mr. Appropriate would be to consider the motion and have a second, unless I misunderstood Councilmember Middleton's.
Right. I was just using parliamentary. Yes, yes, Madam Attorney. I was just using parliamentary shorthand since there seemed to be unanimity, and without the voicing of a objection under unanimous consent, it carries. Unless somebody has an objection, then we would move to motion and second. As I
understand, and that's an acceptable process too, Mr. Mayor. Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember, I think just for the record, let's go ahead and have a motion to rescind And then that way, I just think it'll be cleaner because we had a motion on the floor. I mean, we have a motion that we've passed. So why don't you go ahead and make that motion and we'll get Councilmember Freeman's second and then we'll vote.
Mr. Mayor, before we go
Mr.
forward,
Mayor,
I want to ask again if we could be really clear on what we're rescinding.
Okay.
We're rescinding the timeline. That's the only thing we voted on 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I think that's what the motion has to be, properly stated.
All righty. We'll, does the attorney agree with that?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sure Councilmember Reese has looked at that. I went back and watched that segment of the April 6th meeting, try and capture exactly what the motion was. And it was a schedule. It was a laid out process. So that, yes, Councilmember Reese is articulating it correctly, that what the council actually voted on, which was pursuant to the charter, but what they voted on was an actual schedule of activity to fill the position and make the appointment.
Once we do that, do we need to take further action to proceed under the state statute?
I think it would be helpful just to clarify what process you're using so that no one can accuse the council of not being observant of its duty under the charter. To make
Okay, thank you.
that you've chosen 168-63 as your process to give yourself a little more latitude.
Thank you. All righty. Councilmember Middleton, with that in mind, would you like to make your motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move to rescind our prior action, which in fact was the schedule. So I move to rescind our prior action, which is the laying out of the schedule to fill the Ward 3 seat.
Councilmember Freeman, would you like to second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. Is there any more discussion? I'm doing this against my better judgment.
Just
Thank
to
you,
note
Mayor.
that I appreciate your better judgment, Mr. Mayor, and recognizing that the timeline was really short.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. Councilmember Reese, I believe that there's a second motion could be in order. Would you like to make that motion for how to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. In light of the fact that we've now learned that we can proceed under the state statute, I would make a motion that we elect to operate under state statute 168-63 and avail ourselves of that particular appointment process and appoint a successor to the Ward 3 seat pursuant to 168-63.
Is there a second? Is there a second to that motion? It's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, council colleagues. And Councilmember Reese, we will look to you and your committee for some procedural leadership and some discussions leading up to this. God bless you. Okay. I believe we've done it. I believe there is no other business to come before this body. I'm sorry that I don't have my gavel, which you all know how much I love to bang at the end of these meetings. I'm going to bang this pen and say meeting is adjourned at 8:08 p.m.
Good night, colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Talk to y'all soon.
Have a good night.
Y'all too.